When I came back from the bathroom at the company gala, I saw my wife leaving with her boss through the back door, so I walked over to them and all I could say was, "Sorry to interrupt, but this is our goodbye." I turned around and left behind not just the party, but what was left of our wedding. And in that moment, as the lights flashed and the toasts rang out, I knew, it was all over. The love I'd spent years building was traded in a matter of minutes, for an impulse, a desire, a fantasy she thought would be more exciting than the reality we shared every day. She thought she was trading stability for adventure, comfort for adrenaline, routine for freedom. But what she found was something very different from what she imagined, and I discovered that sometimes losing someone is the only way to find yourself again. The first few days were empty. Everything seemed in slow motion. The bed remained on the same side, the silverware in the same place, the memories in the same corners. Her scent still lingered on the pillow, and every object reminded me that I was no longer a husband, just a betrayed man trying to reorganize the wreckage of what had once been love. And worst of all, no one else seemed to notice what I was feeling. My friends told me to leave, to forget, to move on. But how do you forget someone you've seen every day for years? How do you undo the knot that formed between two bodies who shared the same roof, the same laughter, the same plans? It wasn't just her who was gone. My idea of a future was gone too. The security of being chosen was gone. The ground was gone. And what hurt most wasn't the fact that she cheated on me with someone else, but the fact that she cheated on me with the person she knew would hurt me the most. The boss. The guy she knew I distrusted. Who she said was just too nice, kind of charismatic, not relevant. The man who had everything I didn't, status, influence, superficial charm. She fell for it. Or maybe she did. Maybe she'd been falling for it for a long time and I only realized it too late. I remember the look on her face when I interrupted them. It wasn't fear. It wasn't regret. It was surprise. As if I had no right to be there, as if I were the intruder in the story she'd already rewritten without warning. I went home that night without saying a word. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried like a child. I didn't scream, I didn't break anything, I didn't text. I just cried. And that same morning, I deleted all the photos, packed her clothes in a suitcase, and left them by the door. Not out of revenge, but because I knew that if I left it there for another day, I wouldn't get out of that hole. And deep down, as much as it hurt, I knew it wasn't me who was losing. It was her. Time passed, and she, who at first seemed so confident in her choice, began to slip into her own regret. The messages began to arrive. At first, short, lacking the courage to admit the mistake. "Hi, how are you?" or "I thought about you today." Then came the more explicit declarations, the pleas for forgiveness, the long audio messages at 2 in the morning. And each word of hers seemed to pierce a wall I had already begun to build within myself. It wasn't hate. It was indifference. Not because I never loved her. But because one day I loved her so much that when it ended, it was all over. She said she got confused, that she thought she was looking for something new, but soon realized it wasn't what she wanted. That he ignored her after that night, that he never responded, that she felt discarded. But the problem was never him. It was her. Because she was the one who chose. He just did what he always did, he used her. And me? I was just the consequence. I started over. With someone who looked at me and saw something I couldn't even see anymore. Who chose me even when I was broken. Who didn't ask what happened, just held my hand and said, "Let's move forward from here." She taught me that love isn't about intensity, it's about constancy. It's about waking up next to the same person and still wanting to continue. It's about not having to compete with the world to be chosen. The betrayal ripped my skin off, but the new relationship gave me breath. And it was in that breath that I finally forgave. Without needing her to know, without needing the world to see. I simply stuffed the resentment in an envelope and threw it into the sea of my own peace. Until one day, she appeared. Before me. Eyes downcast, voice trembling, heart in pieces. She said she was sorry, that she would do anything to get back, that now she understood everything she'd lost. And perhaps she expected a scream, an accusation, an emotional punch. But I just said, I forgive you. I truly do. But there's no more us. She cried. She tried to reason with me. She tried to remind me of the promises, the moments, the history. And I remembered. But I also remembered the pain. And there was no more room in me to carry it all again. There was no longer a home for her, where she herself chose to burn down. But what she didn't expect was that one day, on a quick visit to drop off something for our son, yes, we have a son, he'd ask the simplest and most devastating question I'd ever heard. She was standing in the doorway, looking inside, as if missing what she once had. And he, with the cruel innocence of children, asked, "Mommy, why did you make Daddy cry that day?" The silence that followed cut through the air. She stood still. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, as if searching for a way out, an excuse, a lie light enough for a child. But she found none. And I said nothing either. Because that question wasn't mine. It was his. It was our son's. And it was all she needed to hear to understand what she had done, and how much it would never fade from the memory of those who mattered most. She knelt, cried, tried to hug him, but he stood still. Not out of anger. But out of doubt. His mother had broken something he thought was forever. And no matter how much she apologized, there was something that wouldn't hold together. After that, she disappeared for weeks. And when he returned, he was different. He no longer talked about reconciliation, no longer asked for explanations. He just asked to be present. He wanted to rebuild something with his son, not with me. And I let him. Because I understood that sometimes, the only things that can be saved from a broken marriage are the pieces we manage to protect with silence and respect. Today, I walk alongside someone who doesn't demand proof of me, who doesn't compare me to anyone, who understands when I need space and isn't alarmed by my silences. And every time I look back, it's not with resentment. It's with gratitude. Because all of that has brought me here. But the strangest thing is that, even after everything, even after forgiveness, starting over, starting a new life, a question still haunts me from time to time. A question that has no answer. A question that keeps me awake at night on the quietest nights. If I had come back from the bathroom 2 minutes later, would everything have been different? Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not romanticize and never support any type of betrayal. All stories are fictional, created to show, with depth and emotion, how betrayal can destroy lives, families and true loves. Get ready to dive into an intense narrative, full of twists and painful truths. Press play. Take a deep breath. You are about to hear a shocking story, the kind that leaves a mark. Lucas was always a man of few words but a firm presence. The kind of person who didn't need to raise his voice to be respected, nor make promises to be trusted. He was the balance in chaos, the safe harbor amid any storm. He had a silent way of loving, the kind that reveals itself in small gestures, the towel folded in the bathroom, the coffee brewed just right, the coat left on the couch on cold nights for her arrival. Sarah, on the other hand, was pure intensity. She spoke with her hands, felt with her whole body. When she laughed, the atmosphere changed, and when she cried, she made it seem as if the whole world needed to stop and listen to her. She was the kind of woman who lit up the rooms she walked in, but demanded light in return. She wouldn't accept living in anyone's shadow, and even without realizing it, she expected to be the center of attention of those she loved. They met on an ordinary afternoon, the kind you never imagine will change the course of your life. She was late for a meeting and bumped into him as she exited the elevator. He caught her bag before it hit the floor and, unhurriedly, returned it with a restrained smile. There was no immediate magic, but something lingered. A quick exchange of glances that, days later, would resurface in a chance encounter at the building's cafe. Sarah was the one who initiated the conversation. Lucas, as always, measured each word before speaking. But there was something in his eyes that she found curious, a kind of comfortable silence, as if he carried the whole world within himself without ever making a fuss. And that was what drew her in. Unlike anything she had ever known, Lucas was stability. He was the opposite of the emotional chaos she usually encountered in her choices. Their relationship evolved slowly, respecting their own rhythms. Lucas liked planning, being in control. Sarah preferred spontaneity, the unexpected, and life as it came. At first, these differences seemed complementary. Where he was cautious, she was bold. Where she lost her way, he organized. Friends said the two balanced each other out, and perhaps that's why no one was surprised when, after 3 years together, they decided to get married. The ceremony was simple and intimate. Sarah chose a light, unpretentious dress, and Lucas wore the same suit he'd worn to his brother's wedding. For them, the most important thing was each other's presence, the sincere vows exchanged, the looks that didn't lie. Their life together began in a small but characterful apartment. Sarah decorated every corner with meaningful pieces, and Lucas focused on ensuring everything ran smoothly. They divided chores, sometimes arguing over who should wash the dishes or take out the trash, but learned, day after day, to live with each other's imperfections. In the early years, their love seemed untouchable. Lucas would pick her up from work on rainy days, Sarah would leave loving notes hidden among his books. There was care, there was dedication. But over time, the world took its toll. Sarah began to grow professionally, being promoted to positions of greater responsibility. She was intelligent, persuasive, and an excellent communicator. She began to be noticed not only for her performance but also for her strong presence in meetings. Lucas, meanwhile, remained at the same company as always, in a secure but static technical position. He didn't mind, he'd never been driven by ambition, but he increasingly felt that the worlds between them were drifting apart. Their schedules no longer aligned, dinners together became the exception, and their once long and intense conversations were reduced to short phrases between appointments. Sarah said it was a phase, that everything would stabilize, but deep down, they both knew the distance between them was no longer just physical. Still, Lucas remained steadfast. He observed without judging, listened without interrupting. He tried to be present in the spaces that remained, in the small moments, in the details. But Sarah was beginning to lose herself in a life that demanded more and more of her. She needed to be always attentive, always ready, always in control. The demands of her position, the external pressures, the need to constantly prove her capabilities. Little by little, she began to withdraw emotionally, without even realizing it. And Lucas, who felt everything without saying much, began to become even more silent. Sundays, once reserved for movie marathons and lazy breakfasts, became days of video conference meetings or postponed appointments. Sarah was always rushing, always trying to make up for lost time. And Lucas, unsure how to fight what he couldn't control, just waited. He didn't demand, didn't beg, didn't make a scene. But inside him, something was already beginning to break. Still, he kept trying. He texted her in the middle of the day telling her he loved her. He cooked dinner on Fridays when he knew she'd come home exhausted. He was always there. Even when she didn't realize it. Even when she couldn't see him anymore. It was as if they had become roommates. They ate the same bread, slept in the same bed, but no longer shared the same dreams. Sarah, though she didn't say it out loud, was beginning to question whether their love was still enough. Not for lack of affection, but for an inner restlessness she couldn't name. Maybe it was the fear of stagnation. Maybe the doubt that it was still possible to grow alongside him. She began to look for answers in the wrong places, in thoughts she'd avoided out of loyalty, but which surfaced when the lights went out. Lucas, for his part, sensed she was different, but preferred not to press. He thought it was just stress, that she needed time. And as always, he gave her space. Even though that space was growing colder. Despite everything, they continued to try to keep up appearances. They still went out for occasional dinners together, still appeared at social events as the balanced couple. But anyone who looked closely would see that their smiles were more forced, that their eyes no longer met as before. There was a chasm growing between them, but neither wanted to be the first to look inside. Pretending was easier. Pretending they were still together, pretending they still believed. Until the invitation to the company gala arrived. It was an important night for Sarah. She was competing for recognition for the project she was leading, and Lucas, as always, was there to support her. He wore his most sober suit, complimented her new dress, and accompanied her without question. During the party, he tried to chat, toast, and participate. But he noticed she was distant. She greeted everyone enthusiastically, but for himself, she reserved hurried smiles. At one point, he went to the bathroom. That was it. A moment of absence. And when he returned, everything had changed. But that is not the time to be told yet. It's not yet time to know what he saw, nor what happened next. Because before that, you need to understand everything that has been built up to that point. Everything that was said and unsaid. Every silence, every choice, every accumulated distance. Because great tragedies don't begin with screams or slamming doors. They begin in silence. They begin when love begins to become invisible. When someone, even unintentionally, begins to feel alone within an embrace. And it is in this void, where words no longer exist, only presence, that everything begins to fall apart. But, what did he see that night? What did she do while he was gone? And why, even after everything, was there still forgiveness? The answer is near. Very close. When Sarah opened the door that rainy morning, Lucas already knew something was wrong. The sound of her footsteps in the hallway sounded different, the rhythm of her breathing uneven, as if carrying an invisible weight on her chest. She entered without saying anything, dropped her bag on the armchair, and stood still, staring at the floor. He watched, unsure whether to ask or wait. There was something in the air, a tense, dense silence, laden with things that had never been said. Lucas felt a chill run through him, as if he sensed that what came next would change everything, once and for all. When she finally looked up, tears were trapped in her eyelashes, and the tremor in her voice betrayed what she still couldn't say. She took a deep breath, trying to gather her words, but none seemed enough. Time seemed to stretch between them, as if the world were waiting for the moment when everything would shatter. He stepped forward and, in a hushed voice, asked what was happening. Sarah hesitated. She touched his face with her fingertips, an automatic gesture, as if to preserve the memory of his touch before destroying it. Then, with a heavy sigh, she confessed what she had been hiding for weeks. She spoke about the party, about the confusion, about the rash choice. Each word came out brokenly, as if she were cutting herself as she spoke them. Lucas stood still, his face expressionless, his gaze lost somewhere in the distance, trying to understand how a single moment could erase entire years of love and construction. She said she hadn't planned it, that everything had happened suddenly, that she was confused, vulnerable, tired. That the new seemed like nothing more than an escape. Her words tumbled over one another, a mixture of regret and despair. He silently let her speak. Every now and then, he nodded, not agreeing, but also not reacting. When she finally fell silent, the sound of the rain outside seemed the only sound. It was then that he took a deep breath and said, with an almost frightening calmness, that he didn't need to hear any more. "What matters," he said, "is that I know now." Sarah approached, tried to touch his hand, but he stepped back with a slight movement, like someone avoiding fire. She began to cry, saying she wanted to go back, that she regretted it instantly, that she understood the value of everything they had. Lucas heard, but his gaze was no longer the same. There was something definitive there, a sad calm, the kind of peace that comes after an internal war. He didn't shout, didn't get angry. He simply asked why. "Why did you destroy what we had?" he said quietly. She replied that she didn't know, that she wanted to feel something different, that she felt invisible. He simply repeated, with suppressed pain, "I gave you everything I knew how to give. And if that wasn't enough, then nothing else will be." The confession echoed in the room like a sentence. Sarah burst into tears, begging for forgiveness, but he was already beyond anger. It was as if I'd crossed an invisible line. After a while, she left, leaving the scent of her perfume in the air and an emptiness that seemed too big for him. The following days were long and confusing. Lucas alternated between numbness and lucidity, between wanting to understand and not wanting to think. At night, he stared at the ceiling and tried to pinpoint the moment she'd begun to pull away. He discovered there wasn't one exact moment, but a sum of small oversights, accumulated silences, averted glances. It was like a crack slowly growing, until the glass shatters completely. Time passed, and little by little, he began to rebuild himself. It was a silent, almost invisible process. He started leaving the house to walk aimlessly, then returned to the cafe they used to go to, but alone. The owner greeted him discreetly, perhaps out of respect for the sadness that seemed to accompany him. But the world, with its natural indifference, kept spinning, and Lucas learned to spin with it. Until one day, he met someone. I wasn't looking for it, but it happened. It was a simple, soft-spoken woman who looked at him as if she saw beyond the scars. She made no promises, she just stayed. And stayed. Meanwhile, Sarah lost herself in frustrated attempts to regain control of her life. Her friends drifted away, the days seemed too long, and regret weighed like a stone on her chest. She tried to reach out again, but he gently kept his distance. He responded to some messages, rejected others. Until one day, she called, saying she wanted to talk in person, that she needed to see him. Lucas hesitated, but accepted. They met at a discreet cafe, and the reunion was awkward. She seemed smaller, dejected, with a dull glow in her eyes. She spoke of everything she'd thought since that day, of the emptiness she felt, of the sleepless nights. She said she understood the harm she'd caused, that she would do anything to rebuild, even if he never returned. Lucas listened, with the same serene silence as before. When she finished, he responded with a brief, sad smile, saying there was nothing left to rebuild, because the ruins had already become new ground. "I've forgiven you," he said, "but forgiveness isn't an invitation to return. It's a full stop." Sarah cried again, and he didn't try to console her. He just waited for her to calm down. And it was at that moment that a little boy of about 6 ran into the cafe and threw himself into Lucas's arms. The boy, with the same sweet childhood gaze, looked at his mother and smiled, not understanding the tension. Sarah froze. Lucas introduced him, naturally, as their son, the same one she had rarely seen since their separation. The boy asked if he could go to the park later, and Lucas said yes. Sarah bent down to hug him, trying to hide the trembling in her hands. The boy wrapped his tiny arms around her, and for a moment she believed time could be reversed. But then, with the innocence of someone who doesn't understand the scars of adults, he asked, in a clear voice, what no one had ever dared to say out loud. "Mommy, why did you make Daddy cry that day?" The air split. The sound of the coffee disappeared. Sarah stood still, as if the world had stopped around her. Lucas lowered his gaze, saying nothing. The boy, confused, waited for an answer that never came. She tried to smile, but her expression dissolved into tears. She touched her son's face and whispered something inaudible, trying to hold back her tears. The little boy persisted, with the pure curiosity of someone who wants to understand what adults hide. "Was it you, Mommy? Was it you who made him cry?" She broke down. The tears came uncontrollably, each one carrying a piece of the guilt she tried to hide for so long. Lucas stood there, watching, his heart heavy but without rancor. The scene was too painful even for him. Sarah knelt before her son, telling him she'd made a mistake, that she'd hurt Daddy, but that she loved him, and that sometimes people do bad things without meaning to. The innocent boy simply hugged her, not fully understanding, but with the pure love only a child can have. Lucas took a deep breath and placed his hand on his ex-wife's shoulder. He said everything was okay, that the important thing was for his son to understand that mistakes don't erase love, but rather change paths. Sarah looked up and saw, for the first time, that he had truly moved on. There was no more pain, no more anger, no more hope. Only peace. The peace she had traded for a fleeting illusion. When she stood, she noticed their reflection in the cafe mirror, he standing serenely, their son between them, and she, broken, trying to pull herself together. In that moment, she understood the true punishment. It wasn't forgiveness, nor separation. It was knowing that, by her own choice, she had become a sad memory in the life of the one she loved most. Lucas walked out, hand in hand with her son, as she watched them walk away, feeling the emptiness grow like never before. And in the boy's eyes, before they disappeared around the corner, she saw the silent answer she'd always feared. He didn't blame her, but he didn't understand either. She stood there for long minutes, her heart aching, trying to understand exactly where she began to lose everything. But perhaps the loss began the day she stopped seeing the one who truly loved her. And that, she knew, was a wound that would never heal. In the months that followed that last conversation, everything changed forever. Sarah began to live with an absence that wouldn't let up. It wasn't just Lucas's physical absence, nor her son's distance, who now felt more comfortable with his father than with her. It was the emptiness within her, the echo of the choices she'd made, the silent nights when no one asked how her day was or tucked her in with the duvet when she fell asleep on the couch. Time no longer filled anything. She tried to occupy her mind with work, with courses, with the gym. He tried traveling, meeting new people, smiling in photos to look good. But her soul was tired of pretense. And even surrounded by people, she'd never felt so alone. She'd spend hours looking through old photo albums on her phone, rewatching videos of her son when he was still young, of ordinary family days, and wondering how everything had been lost so quickly, how she'd let love slip through her fingers without realizing it. She could no longer enter certain places in the city without being struck by the memory of him, the park bench where they used to talk about the future, the bakery he insisted on going to on Sundays just to buy her favorite bread, the traffic light where he always made fun of people's rush. It was all there. But he was gone. Lucas, for his part, never looked back. His new relationship blossomed slowly, unhurriedly, without pressure. It was a relationship built on peace, mutual respect, and the simple desire to be close. The woman now by his side didn't demand anything from him, she chose him every day without asking for proof. She didn't compare him to anyone else, didn't expect him to be the most romantic or the most daring, but accepted him completely. And Lucas, after so long feeling invisible in his own home, finally felt seen. Not for what he did, but for who he was. His son, growing ever closer to him, had a new sparkle in his eyes. Saturday walks in the park became routine, and the silences between them were now light, full of meanings that didn't need to be spoken. Sarah tried to reach out to her son several times, and he, with the innocence of someone who still loves unconditionally, didn't reject her, but he also didn't open up as much as before. She realized there was a barrier there, built not out of revenge, but by a truth he sensed in his father's gaze. Lucas never angered him, never spoke ill of her, never used his son as a shield. But the child realized, on his own, who was left behind. And when a child realizes alone, the bond is broken at a much deeper level. Sarah insisted, tried to show she was present, made promises, but her words came too late. It was like trying to light a candle in the rain. One day, while sorting through old boxes in her closet, Sarah found a letter Lucas wrote years ago. It was a birthday letter she'd never opened. It said simple things, but filled with feeling. He talked about how blessed he felt to have her by his side, about the plans he still had for them, about how much she still enchanted him even on days when she was moody or distant. That letter, forgotten among papers, was like a belated stab in the back. Because there, in calm and truthful words, was the man she once had but let slip away through vanity, haste, and distraction. The pain was so great that she sat on the closet floor and cried like a teenager who'd lost her first love. Because, in fact, she had lost the love of her life. Meanwhile, Lucas received an offer to move to another city with his new partner. It was a professional opportunity for her, and for him, a complete fresh start. They thought long and hard, talked, and included their son in the decision. The child, excited about the move, asked what the new house would be like, if there would be a park nearby, if he could make new friends. Lucas saw in his son's eyes the freedom he had always wanted to offer, a peaceful, tension-free environment where love wouldn't be tainted by old hurts. In the last week before the move, Sarah asked for one last conversation. They met on the same bench where they had sat so many times before, when love was still easy. She was visibly thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, and her puffy eyes betrayed sleepless nights. She said she didn't want to stop the move, that she understood everything. But she needed to say, one last time, what she carried in her heart. She spoke of her regret with a choked voice, apologizing for everything she had destroyed, for failing to look, for believing she could find outside what she already had inside. She said she admired the man he had become even without her. That the love they once had was real, and if he ever doubted it, he wouldn't doubt it anymore. Lucas listened, as he always did, respectfully. But his eyes no longer trembled with her words. When she finished, he simply said he wished her peace too. That he hoped regret wouldn't become a prison, but a learning experience. And that, above all, he hoped she would one day forgive herself again. He calmly stood up, gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, and walked back. Sarah sat there, staring into the void ahead, feeling for the first time the true weight of the consequence. It wasn't the loss of her man, nor her son, nor her stability. It was the loss of herself. In his new home, Lucas began to rebuild his life with a calm he had never experienced before. Mornings were quiet and filled with presence. Little by little, he resumed old hobbies, made friends, and discovered new versions of himself. His relationship was light, mature, without the intense ups and downs of the past. His son flourished, more curious, more communicative, more confident. And on the nights he put his son to bed, Lucas would spend a few minutes watching his son's peaceful sleep and feel that, despite everything, he had done the right thing. He hadn't wallowed in pain, he hadn't held on to the past, he hadn't returned with hatred what he'd received with betrayal. He simply moved on. Sarah, alone in an apartment now too big for just one person, faced the daily reflection of her choices. She tried new relationships, but nothing fit. Because everyone seemed pale in the memory of someone who loved her even on the days she forgot how to love. She carried her guilt with dignity, never trying to rewrite history to appear like a victim. She knew she had made a mistake, she knew she lost, and she knew that some mistakes cannot be fixed. In the end, their story didn't end with screams, nor with reconciliation, nor with poetic endings. It ended as truly painful stories do, with silence, with distance, with acceptance. And to outsiders, it might seem like just another breakup. But to those who lived it, it was a whole life divided into two parts, before and after a single moment. If you got this far, comment, do you think she deserved a second chance, or are some decisions truly irreversible? Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Your presence here is very important to us. And remember, betrayal destroys homes, breaks trust that may never be rebuilt, hurts children, erodes true love and changes lives forever. This channel does not support any type of betrayal. We are here to show, through fictional but deeply real stories, how thoughtless choices can leave eternal scars. See you in the next story. And until then, may the love you cultivate always be the love you choose, even on difficult days.